Picture this. It's 1940, and you're a young British soldier. An officer approaches with an offer. Participate in a simple experiment to help protect your fellow troops, and you'll get extra leave time. You say yes. Hours later, you're locked in a gas chamber as mustard gas fills the air around you. Your skin begins to blister, your eyes burn like fire, and the worst part, this isn't enemy action. It's your own government conducting experiments on you. For over 30 years, Britain systematically exposed thousands of its own servicemen to deadly chemical weapons. What they discovered would shock the world, but the truth remained buried for decades. In 1916, as World War I raged across Europe, Britain established a secret research facility in the countryside of Wiltshire. Porton Down, as it became known, would become the epicenter of Britain's chemical and biological weapons program. What started as a response to German gas attacks quickly evolved into something far more sinister. The facility's mission was simple on paper: develop better protection against chemical weapons and understand their effects. But to achieve this goal, Britain made a chilling decision. They would test these weapons on their own people. The experiments began small, but as the years passed, they grew in scope and brutality. From World War I through the early Cold War period, British military scientists would expose thousands of servicemen to mustard gas and other chemical agents. The results were devastating. While Porton Down conducted its grim research in England, an even darker chapter was unfolding in British India. In the military cantonment of Rawalpindi, hundreds of British Indian Army soldiers became unwilling test subjects in what can only be described as medical torture. During the 1930s and 1940s, these soldiers were marched into gas chambers wearing nothing but shorts and cotton shirts. The reasoning was cold and calculated. British scientists wanted to study how different skin types reacted to mustard gas exposure. They were particularly interested in whether Indian soldiers might be more or less susceptible to chemical burns than their British counterparts. The experiments were methodical and cruel. Soldiers were exposed to varying concentrations of sulfur mustard gas, while researchers carefully documented the results. Severe burns were not just expected, they were the point. The scientists wanted to map exactly how much gas it took to cause first, second, and third-degree chemical burns. What made these experiments even more horrific was the complete lack of follow-up care. Unlike the Porton Down trials, where some attempt was made to monitor long-term effects, the Indian soldiers were simply sent back to their units once the immediate experiment concluded. No one tracked their long-term health. No one cared if they developed chronic breathing problems or cancer years later. To understand the true horror of these experiments, you need to know what mustard gas actually does to the human body. Sulfur mustard is what scientists call a vesicant, a blistering agent that attacks every part of your body it touches. When mustard gas contacts your skin, it doesn't cause immediate pain. That's part of what makes it so insidious. You might not realize you've been exposed for hours, but once the damage begins, it's irreversible. The gas penetrates deep into your skin cells, destroying them from the inside out. Massive blisters form, often covering huge portions of your body. Your eyes suffer even worse damage. Mustard gas causes severe keratitis, inflammation of the cornea that can lead to permanent blindness. Soldiers exposed to the gas often developed corneal scarring that left them partially or completely blind for life. But perhaps the most devastating effects occur in your respiratory system. Mustard gas doesn't just burn your lungs, it fundamentally alters them. Survivors often developed chronic bronchitis that persisted for decades. Many would struggle with breathing problems for the rest of their lives, essentially developing a condition similar to severe COPD. The long-term cancer risks were equally terrifying. Soldiers exposed to mustard gas showed elevated rates of respiratory cancers, skin cancers, and other malignancies. The chemical literally rewrote their DNA, creating mutations that would haunt them for decades. At Porton Down, the experiments took several forms, each more disturbing than the last. The most notorious were the gas chamber trials. Servicemen, often from the RAF or Army, were led into sealed chambers where controlled amounts of mustard gas were released. The stated purpose was to test respirators and protective clothing, but the reality was far more complex. Scientists varied the concentration and duration of exposure to create detailed maps of how the gas affected human subjects. They wanted to know exactly how much gas was needed to cause specific types of injuries. This wasn't just about protection, it was about weaponization. Even more disturbing were the skin patch tests. Researchers would apply drops of pure sulfur mustard directly to marked areas of a soldier's skin. They would then monitor how long it took for blisters to form, how severe the burns became, and how long they took to heal. Different treatments were tested on different patches of skin, turning each subject into a living laboratory. These weren't one-time exposures either. Many soldiers underwent multiple tests over weeks or months. Their bodies became testing grounds for various decontaminants, protective ointments, and medical treatments. If you're finding this information valuable, make sure you subscribe to stay updated on more hidden historical events like this one. The scale of Britain's human experimentation program was staggering. Between 1939 and 1989, approximately 20,000 participants were exposed to around 400 different substances at Porton Down alone. Mustard gas was just one weapon in an arsenal of chemical and biological agents tested on British servicemen. The program continued well into the Cold War era, expanding to include nerve agents, biological weapons, and psychoactive drugs. Each new weapon required human testing, and Britain's military scientists were always ready to provide volunteers, whether those volunteers truly understood what they were signing up for or not. In Rawalpindi, hundreds of Indian soldiers participated in chamber exposures during the 1930s and 1940s. But these numbers likely represent only a fraction of the total. Record-keeping in colonial India was often poor, and many experiments may have gone completely undocumented. Perhaps the most disturbing aspect of these experiments was how soldiers were recruited. Modern analysis of historical documents reveals that information given to volunteers was often misleading or completely false. Soldiers were told they were participating in studies to develop better protective equipment. They weren't informed about the serious health risks they faced. Many were simply ordered to participate as part of their military duties. Others were enticed with promises of extra leave time or small payments. The concept of informed consent, now considered fundamental to any human experimentation, simply didn't exist. The situation was even worse for the Indian Army troops in Rawalpindi. These soldiers had no choice in their participation. They were ordered into the gas chambers as part of their military service. The colonial power structure made any form of real consent impossible. Documents from the period show that researchers were aware they were putting subjects at risk. Internal memos discuss compensation frameworks for unknown dangers and acknowledge that long-term effects were poorly understood. Yet the experiments continued for decades. For nearly 50 years, the British government maintained strict secrecy about these experiments. Veterans who developed health problems were often denied compensation or medical care. Their claims were dismissed as unrelated to their military service. The wall of silence began to crack in the 1990s and 2000s as aging veterans started coming forward with their stories. Many had developed the exact health problems that modern science now associates with mustard gas exposure: chronic respiratory disease, skin cancers, and eye problems. Legal challenges began mounting. Veterans demanded access to their medical records from Porton Down, but the government consistently refused. They claimed the information was still classified for national security reasons, even decades after the experiments had ended. The breakthrough came in 2005 when a Porton Down veteran won a landmark case at the European Court of Human Rights. The court ruled that the British government's refusal to provide medical records violated the veteran's right to a fair trial in his compensation claim. This victory opened the floodgates. Hundreds of other veterans came forward with similar claims. Parliamentary investigations were launched. Medical assessment programs were established to evaluate the health impacts on survivors. The evidence that emerged was damning. Government documents revealed that officials had known about the serious health risks all along. They had deliberately concealed information from both the test subjects and the public. In 2008, the British government finally issued a formal apology to Porton Down veterans. Defence Minister de Brown acknowledged that the experiments had been conducted without proper consent and had caused serious harm to participants. The government's apology came with financial compensation, but the amounts were relatively modest. A global settlement of £3 million was divided among hundreds of veterans, averaging out to just a few £1,000s per person for a lifetime of suffering. Individual cases sometimes received larger awards. The family of Ronald Madison, a serviceman who died during nerve agent testing at Porton Down, received £100,000 and a formal apology. But for most veterans, the compensation was barely enough to cover their ongoing medical expenses. Many veterans had already died by the time the government acknowledgement came. Their families received nothing. The Indian soldiers tested in Rawalpindi were completely forgotten. No apology, no compensation, no recognition of their suffering. The health effects of these experiments continue to this day. Survivors still struggle with chronic respiratory problems, skin conditions, and elevated cancer risks. Their children and grandchildren worry about potential genetic effects passed down through generations. But the impact goes beyond just physical health. These experiments represent a fundamental betrayal of the military's duty to protect its own people. Soldiers who volunteered to defend their country were instead used as test subjects in dangerous medical experiments. The psychological trauma has been immense. Many veterans report feeling betrayed not just by their government, but by the institution they served with pride. The knowledge that their own military deliberately put them in harm's way has been devastating to their sense of identity and patriotism. While the mustard gas experiments officially ended decades ago, questions remain about what other secret programs may have existed. Documents continue to be classified, and full disclosure has never occurred. The Porton Down facility still operates today, though it now focuses on defensive research and is subject to much stricter ethical oversight. Modern human experimentation requires extensive informed consent procedures and independent ethical review. But the legacy of those dark decades continues to shape how we think about military medical research. The experiments at Porton Down and Rawalpindi serve as a stark reminder of what happens when scientific curiosity is pursued without ethical constraints. They also highlight the particular vulnerabilities of military personnel who can be ordered to participate in activities they might otherwise refuse. The power dynamics inherent in military service make truly free consent nearly impossible in many situations. Despite decades of investigation and legal action, many questions about Britain's chemical weapons testing program remain unanswered. How many people were actually exposed? What other substances were tested? Are there still veterans suffering from unexplained health problems related to secret experiments? The full scope of testing in British India may never be known. Colonial records were often incomplete, and many may have been deliberately destroyed. The hundreds of Indian soldiers known to have participated in the Rawalpindi experiments likely represent only the tip of the iceberg. There are also troubling questions about whether similar programs existed in other parts of the British Empire. If experiments were conducted in India, were they also carried out in other colonies where oversight was minimal and subjects were considered expendable? Recent investigations have revealed that the collaboration between British and Allied chemical weapons programs was extensive. Information and techniques were shared between Britain, the United States, Canada, and Australia. This suggests that the human experimentation may have been even more widespread than previously believed. But perhaps the most important unanswered question is whether we've truly learned from this dark chapter in history. As new weapons and technologies emerge, will we repeat the same mistakes? Will military necessity once again be used to justify unconscionable experiments on human subjects? The answer to that question may determine whether the suffering of those thousands of servicemen will have any lasting meaning, or whether their sacrifice will be forgotten as history prepares to repeat itself. What we do know for certain is that the full truth about Britain's mustard gas trials may still be waiting to be discovered in classified files that remain sealed to this day.